This morning, I was having a think about fear and how we perceive it, not just as a part of our mind, but also as a physical, let's say, manifestation in our body. And I started to think about how whether I was super mindful of it or not, how I would perceive fear in my mind and body. And I noticed I have a clear pattern of seeing fear as a sort of static object, perhaps a big metallic cube of some sort, just for the sake of conversation, that suddenly appears in the middle of a very tidy room, completely throwing off the feng shui or setup or vibe. And from that frame, I noticed that my mindset, or just simply my instinctual response, is I need to get this cube the hell out of my house. It is messing up the feng shui. It is messing up the vibe. And of course, what happens when you try to force fear out of your system? It gets much worse. It gets much bigger. It can get more aggressive. On the other hand, if you try to ignore it, it's still there in your way, blocking your path. And every time you pass by it as you're walking through your house, as you're going about your day, you get a cringy feeling or a annoyed feeling. And those feelings jerk you into thoughts of taking action on this thing. How can we get this out of the house? And those jerking thoughts, those ones that speak of a mindset of this cube of fear is a problem. This is not one of us. This is telling me something is wrong in the system. And when you walk by it enough times, you feel you're wrong. The fact of it being there and refusing to leave, you might reflect and say, hey, something's not right about me. That's why this thing came and showed up. And you might even start to try to take yourself apart, in a sense, in hopes that that would sort of act as a sacrifice to the metallic fear cube sitting in the center of the house that we're imagining is our mind and peace of mind and ability to just go through the normal motions of our daily lives, our work, our gym, our eating, our conversations. If you're avoiding it or trying to attack it, it fights back in insidious ways, either making you take yourself apart in self-consciousness. What have I done wrong to be afraid of, this conversation that's coming up with my manager or about a certain assignment that we had done and there's nothing wrong with it. It's absolutely perfect. Or this conversation that is coming up with my sister or my mom about something that we had agreed on in the past. And there's nothing to worry about, but fear is saying, be careful. There's a threat. And that's where we start to be able to identify that, hey, maybe this thing is trying to help you. That's what happened to me. Once I was actually told that fear is something in your brain, in the amygdala, and I don't know biology that well and neurology, but something along the lines of your parasympathetic nervous system is reacting and trying to protect you. It completely opened my eyes to, this is not a foreign object in the middle of my house disrupting my normal rhythms. It is an old mechanism there designed to protect me. It is a friend, not a foe. And for a time, that realization really comforted me and helped me come to terms with sometimes I'm going to walk into a conversation, and just because I've had perhaps recently some interaction where I didn't serve it too well, I didn't listen to this part of what this person was saying, I went in my thoughts and got distracted, and I missed what this person said, and I didn't say anything about it, and I just nodded along. And I sort of could see in that person's eyes a bit of recognition that I'm not really following. And so when I left I left feeling guilty and not really liking myself, So this is an example where if your body recognizes that you're entering a situation like that, that's similar to something in the past where your self-image was on the line, because that's what fear is designed to protect, your self-image and your actual physical body. if it recognizes that, hey, this could be a similar situation, it will turn on the red flags, the red alerts, and say, hey, you should be a bit scared. And for maybe less anxious people, that would be a slight nudge, that it would be not even noticeable. And that would just pump them with a bit of cortisol or whatever it is, make them a bit more alert, make them a bit more present, and it would serve them. Oh, you need to listen to this person. So forget about the Amazon shopping list that you're visualizing for a moment and listen to this person. And that is an example of a way where fear is really helping you. So there is this sense, and some people might relate with this, that some of us have a bad relationship with fear. One of distaste, of hate, of frustration towards this thing in our body that turns on red flags, makes us primed to respond to a fight or flight situation where there's a danger we must protect ourselves against that doesn't exist, creates this physically and mentally fatiguing response in our body again and again and again. And if we're not careful, what happens to people who relate with this is that we tend to develop an unhealthy relationship with fear, which is really a tool and a friend that tries to protect us and help us be more present and watch out for things in our environment that we need to watch out for. Let's just say it like that. So when I started to really interact with these ideas, with the fact that fear is a friend, but perhaps that it doesn't have 20/20 vision, that it can't see if indeed there is a threat with 100% clarity, and that it needs our present and conscious assistance to say, hey, hold on a second, there's no threat here actually, for it to sort of withdraw and say, okay, all right, but just in case I needed to raise some red flags. If we have that conversation with fear and recognize its utility, I've noticed that from my side, it starts to trust you more. The mechanism in your body, this sounds quite abstract and quite esoteric, but really, I'm someone who has experienced it go from very mild to very intense, crippling, and back. And the way back was forged on terms of mutual negotiation with fear. So these are not just thoughts that I'm having. These are based on experiences that I've had over many years. Even though I've had these experiences, however, I still sometimes find myself or catch myself perceiving fear in my body as the block, the metallic, huge, out-of-place block in the middle of my house, middle of my center of peace and mind, disrupting and taking away my attention from stuff I actually care about. And I think really it's important for me to stop at that level of perception. Stop at when I feel this feeling in my body and start to notice thoughts that pop up that try to rationalize it. Oh, yes, indeed, what you said in that conversation was a negative point towards your self-image. Be careful next time. Okay, now what could I have said? And maybe I'd get this thought in the middle of working on something for my job, or in the middle of cooking or talking on the phone. And it's disrupting, literally, my life. And so I perceive it as this disruptor, this block, this object that does not belong. And not really do anything about it. I wouldn't judge that perception. I would accept it as reality. That's the key thing. And move on and act in accordance with it. So I found myself slowly again starting to try to get this box out of my house that doesn't fit through the doorway, right? And obviously failing. And the funny thing is, when I started to become aware of this interaction, this new old interaction I was having with fear again, I started to feel different qualities in my body and mind that sort of denoted something real about fear or such feelings. I mean, worth noting that this possibly could be applied to things like anger, even perhaps positive feelings, but for the sake of today, let's stick to fear. So I started to notice qualities of fear that allowed me to offer a slightly more beneficial narrative, one that fits in line with this idea of fear being a friend, not a foe. Qualities like the fact that sometimes no matter what you did, fear would come and go in its own time. Whether you ignored it or tried to force it out, there would be a time frame for it to exist. Qualities like the fact that it would change in intensity and that it would sort of affect different parts of your body, including your head, your mind. This morning, when I was thinking about it, a new narrative formed. That's why I'm recording this. One way I'm looking at fear today that helps me keep this friend narrative alive is looking at it as though it is a storm in the middle of the ocean or in the middle of a large body of water that is conjured up by various forces that exist over this body of water. Gravity, the moon, the tides, the wind, evaporation, precipitation. And so this storm is a natural occurrence that is as natural as the wind itself or even the water itself. And it starts over a certain portion of the water, not the whole body of water. And it starts to rain and the waves start to get stronger. The wind starts to get stronger, and then perhaps it travels to another part of the body of water. But then it passes, and then the water is calm, and the waves are calm, and the push and pull is as easy as breathing. And I found that to be a somewhat profound image, that fear could be looked at as a sort of storm whose start is something we don't have control over, even though in this image we might be that body of water, simply existing under the storm, under the factors of the storm. And it ends also of natural circumstances that just are a function of what it is, what a storm is. And that was profound, not just because it's poetic and it rings true in certain senses, but also because it denotes a very specifically different quality between the first image of a solid object, fear being in the middle of the room as a solid object, and fear being this sort of amorphous, almost semi-living thing that has its own separate existence somehow, somewhat, so to speak. And it slightly started to allow me more to create this friend narrative. One, because it felt closer to the truth. It felt closer to this idea that no matter what I do sometimes, there's just going to be this sense of there's a threat and there's nothing I can do about it. Even if I say to myself, nothing is happening, there's no threat. My body is just in storm mode. And if I accept it's this living, semi-living, amorphous thing that needs to come, live, exist, and pass, it allows me to not do things that would make the storm worse, to put it simply. I share this because I need to reflect on the unconscious part of me that keeps conjuring this image of fear as this unwanted thing and start seeing it more for what it actually is. I think from the previous idea of seeing it as a block, just creating narratives is something we should be careful about. But I also feel as long as we're mindful about the fact that we're creating narratives, we can use them as helpful tools. How? We need to be willing to update the narrative when new information presents itself. So for whoever's listening, I invite you to, next time fear comes knocking on your door or suddenly appears in the middle of your house, first of all, perceive it in your body. Watch it where it is in your body. Is it in your chest? Is it in your stomach? Is it in your legs? In your head? How is the energy of the fear flowing? Try to see if you can appreciate that it does have a sort of flowing quality. And it's not just a static thing that you need to get rid of, out of place. And just for a few moments on noticing this and its sensations in your body, let it be. Even a semi-living thing wants to live, wants to be seen. Maybe that in itself would help lessen from the strength of the storm, which, hey, suggests that part of its mission is, if this guy is ignoring me, maybe if I get stronger, he will hear me. So maybe if you do hear it early on, it doesn't feel the need to get stronger.